The Pathless is a 2020 indie game made by Giant Squid Studios, a team of developers known for their work on beautifully immersive gaming experiences in Flower, Journey, and Abzu. So as soon as The Pathless was revealed, those familiar with the team knew what to expect. But something was definitely different this time. The development style of Giant Squid takes inspiration from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow state, and their games are arguably the most well-executed applications of flow theory in the entire games industry. Flower, Journey, and Abzu are defined by their meditative, minimalistic approach to gameplay. Players can get the hang of controlling their avatar and moving through the world in a matter of minutes, even if they're not avid gamers. From there, it's up to the breathtaking visuals and audio design to keep the player engaged, along with a short, well-paced narrative.
In The Pathless, Giant Squid manages to bring their design philosophy into a completely different setting. An action-adventure, open-world game. Much of the gameplay revolves around the archery mechanic, which allows players to shoot targets without requiring aiming. Not only is it simple and easy to learn, but it's very versatile, being used in movement, puzzles, and combat. The game also makes other unusual yet very deliberate choices with these mechanics that are entirely in service of flow and immersion. The Pathless has no map or fast travel, and instead uses spirit vision to highlight POIs in the distance, and allows the fast, exhilarating movement system to take center stage. And when it's time for a boss fight, there's no game over, just running and shooting, but there are multiple phases with all kinds of action scenes. Thus, boss fights are less about testing skill, and more about getting swept up in the cinematics and spectacle. While other Giant Squid games can almost feel like walking simulators, The Pathless nails a satisfying middle ground between a normal RPG and a meditative experience.
Systems immersion is achieved in The Pathless through the game's unique mechanics. In the beginning of the game, the player is introduced to the game's movement systems. Instead of a regular stamina bar, the player shoots talismans scattered across the landscape to keep up their speed. This provides the player with an engaging activity throughout the game, drawing the player into a state of concentration. Spatial immersion is accomplished by the beautiful scenery. The player is expected to roam the beautiful world filled with forests, mountains, and ancient ruins. The dynamic lighting and weather effects deepen the realism, making the world feel alive. The game doesn't provide a visual minimap, forcing the player to use the visual cues in the environment to find their way around the world. This makes discovery feel more like a personal accomplishment, making for a more intimate playthrough.
The video What Makes a Game Immersive by the Game Over Analyzer describes another type of immersion called sensory immersion. The idea behind sensory immersion is that we can be immersed into a world using senses like sound and visuals in order to bring us closer to what is happening in the game. The Pathless takes full advantage of this with a dynamic soundtrack and sound design, and using colors and other visuals to give the player emotional cues. To avoid taking the player out of the game while providing a soundtrack that adapts to the story, the Pathless adds different instruments and smoothly transitions between tracks that fit the story beat. For example, there's multiple different tracks that correspond to each of the bosses in the current area of the world. The music will also add different instruments depending on what the player is doing. For example, a sort of drum beat plays when the player is maintaining a constant speed while traversing. Since the music corresponds to the boss of the area, when the player defeats the boss, the section of the island loses its music, with only sounds of winds and birds to break the silence. The game also uses its visuals to generate emotions in the player. When the player perfectly times their shot, the game slows down and then gives a large gust of wind before speeding up again to give a sense of a big burst of speed. The game also uses colors to enhance emotional boss fights by filling the screen with mostly red and orange palettes to add a sense of urgency and intensity to these fights. The game also heavily utilizes the controller's haptics, so it can even interact with the player's sense of touch, for an added layer of sensory immersion. If the player falls from a great height, it is emphasized by making the controller shake an amount correlated with the height of the fall. The large bosses also rumble the controller as they walk to give a sense of scale of these creatures, as the player attempts to cure them from darkness.
In the Pathless, narrative immersion is achieved through a unique blend of environmental storytelling, a strong bond with the Eagle Companion, and a design that removes typical guidance, letting players navigate and interpret the story through exploration. Playing as the hunter, players can roam a cursed land, working to restore light to sacred shrines. Instead of using traditional dialogue or text-heavy exposition, the Pathless relies on visual storytelling and environmental cues to communicate its mythic backstory. This makes the story feel like something we're uncovering firsthand, adding a layer of mystery and personal investment to the hunter's journey. The bond with the Eagle Companion plays a huge role in enhancing immersion. By caring for the eagle and working together to solve puzzles, players develop a natural, emotional connection that feels integral to the story. The eagle isn't just a tool, it's a partner in this journey, symbolizing trust and interdependence in a world shadowed by darkness. The game's minimalist design also deepens immersion by avoiding typical HUD elements and markers. Instead, players use spirit vision and environmental cues, giving a more natural sense of discovery. This subtle approach makes exploration feel rewarding, as each new area or ancient ruin feels like a small piece of the world's lore that we're placing together on our own. By combining emotional connection, atmospheric cues, and open-ended exploration, the Pathless immerses players in a journey that feels personal, mysterious, and profoundly engaging.